I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and we'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about looking beyond appearances. In New Thought, we teach that we live in our minds and not in the world. We believe that the things that occur in your mind and my mind determine the quality of our lives. But we know that there are events that take place, and there are experiences that take place in all of our lives. And in some cases, those events and those experiences may be negative, may bring us suffering and pain, may bring us confusion, depression, and even illness. But we know that if we look beyond the appearance, if we look beyond what we can see with our physical eyes, that there is divine order in the midst of every circumstance and situation. And what we really need to do is to look beyond what we see on the surface. A couple of weeks ago at the center, we were talking, or not the center, but at a meeting, we were talking about the concept and the idea when we're faced with challenge or difficulty to stop what we're doing, stop what we're thinking, look beyond what the appearances are, and listen to our inner guidance. And that's really an easy three-step process to looking beyond appearances, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And when we do that, we're tuning ourselves to the divine, our divine within is tuning ourselves to divinity. And we're living from a higher aspect of our beinghood, which is what people do when they invent, get a wonderful invention or have a marvelous thought or create something that's lovely. So we're doing that whether or not we recognize that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And we do need to look beyond appearances in so many cases. And I'm just thinking about people whom we talk to in counseling who have hurt feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people have hurt feelings from their childhood. They have hurt feelings from their parents as they were growing up. They have hurt feelings from relationships. And we really do in many, many instances, need to look beyond those things, don't we? And to get to the core of them, not necessarily, I'm not talking about therapy that's going to regress ourselves to them, although that happens sometimes, but I'm talking more about the ability to have insight, to look beyond those things and let them go.
That's right. So often hanging on to those negativities become a habit. Just last week, I counseled a lady who was having great physical problems. She has three distinct and separate physical problems. And she and her husband have been married almost 50 years, and they formed the habit of nagging at each other. And she tells him what he's doing wrong with his body, and he's telling her. And both of them have very severe, she has those critical problems, and her husband has critical health problems. He can't walk very well, and he can't see to drive, for example, but he can see to use his computer. But he has limited health resources within him. And so as we talked, she could see that they've been their own worst enemy of hitting out at each other, sending their energy into each other in a negative way and in such close proximity. And obviously they love each other and they want to stay married. So as we talked, I could see that if she and her husband would make a pact that they're not going to say anything each to the other about their health, they're not going to say anything that impacts on the health. If one wants to drink 18 cups of coffee, the other won't say don't drink coffee. They'll just as the kids say, shine it on. And or if they want to use alternative medicine, then they'll allow the other to use alternative medicine without a word being uttered. And so that was more than a week ago. So she called me back yesterday and said, it worked.
Oh.
We're really doing well with that. And sometimes we just need to have someone else tell us, make a suggestion. And as you know, you rarely give advice and I rarely give advice in counseling. We don't make up people's minds for them. But very often we have to interject a thought so that they can take that and go with it. And that worked in that way. And so there's a good example where the mind has destroyed the body because they've been negative, and they're both retired. And so they've, for some time, and so they've allowed their bodies to deteriorate through this process of negativity.
Mm-hmm. But as they got beyond that and they looked beyond the appearance and beyond the surface,
yes.
And that's what happens in our lives so often. We just look at the surface.
Yes.
And with hurt feelings, for instance, we often don't look at the other person's, where they have come from, what's impacted them, what's brought them to that point. And so often it's difficult to do that. And it's difficult to do that when we're in the midst of very, very negative experiences. One that I think about is the issue of abuse. And we know how horrible and damaging that is to life, but we also know that abusers are often come from from abuse,
Yeah.
and that cycle continues. And so those individuals simply see the surface, and then it is their view of the surface of what that person is that drives them to react, when in fact something has brought them to that point. And that's not at all saying that we should excuse it, but it is to say that anytime anyone does anything to harm us, uh, they've been damaged
Yeah.
themselves. And I think that's tremendously important, that people come into this life good,
Yeah.
and they all come in as wonderful little children.
Mhm.
And then at some point in time, some of us get, as Buckminster Fuller once said, some of us get more damaged than others. And thank heavens and thank God that some of us are significantly less damaged than others, but some are damaged significantly, and then they damage others. And that whole process is just based upon the superficial
Mhm.
seeing of each other. And we need to really understand that everybody's damaged to a
Mhm.
point.
Yes, because we wouldn't be here on earth if we were not, because people, well-meaning people, can cause damage when they in their heart think they're doing the right thing. And and very often we resist that which is really best for us, and just the resistance. Isn't that interesting? It's when we resist something that it creates the damage in our body. I learned that once when I was hearing a message in relation to my family. Resist not evil, I heard. And I said, well, my family is not evil. They're just misguided. And so then uh, I was putting the evil impact onto it. They were not. Isn't that interesting?
It is, it is. And that view that you had,
Mm-hmm.
and how we view things
Mm-hmm.
at their surface appearance, when in
Mm-hmm.
fact the reality is much deeper.
Mm-hmm. And by giving the connotation of evil to it, and I didn't even admit it to myself that I was doing that, but obviously I was. So it's we can always look within ourselves to see where the problem lies, and then go on from there without projecting it onto the other person, but just taking responsibility for our own thoughts, actions, and so forth. And when we do take that self-responsibility, we see ever so much more clearly, because our vision is clouded with the negativity that we're projecting.
Uh-huh.
But if we clear ourselves and look to see where we're doing the wrong thing, then it's a joyous event, because then the other person sees, well, you're not persecuting them, and you really want to understand, and we go on from there in a positive way, instead of always heading back and forth at each other.
Mm-hmm. On a very simple level, when we get our feelings hurt by something that someone says about us or to us, I think that's a real lesson that we have to come to this point of stopping our reaction. When our reaction is to be hurt
Mm-hmm.
or to be angry, and then of course all of the things that come with those feelings, to strike back and to really become much more self-pitying. We really need to be aware of the fact that when these kinds of negative thoughts come into our minds as a result of what someone has said or done,
Mm-hmm.
we need to stop that way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to look away from what was said,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to seek that inner guidance and be open to the fact that we can let it go if we
Mm-hmm.
choose to let it go.
That's right. First of all, we need to look within and see, am I really guilty of that? And sometimes we're guilty of more things than we realize on first thought. If on second thought, we can see that we've done something wrong.
Uh-huh.
And another thing, when people say things about us, I think if we just laugh about it, it dissipates the energy and makes it wonderful. There was a young man who called me and said he had kicked the door in at his home. And I laughed, and I didn't really mean to laugh, but I just laughed. I thought that was really weird. And so he said to her after they reconciled, I don't understand, Iris. When I told her I kicked the door in, she just laughed. But it really, laughter dissipates a lot of negative energy, and it relaxes the other person, and they can see more clearly. Instead of going down the path of, oh, isn't that awful?
Yeah.
Doubly, well, if we go singly, it loses some of its energy, and if someone else interjects a different energy, a lighter energy, then we can see, the person who's troubled can see more clearly. Mm-hmm. And it always helps if we can, a little levity goes a long way.
Right. And remembering that old adage that sticks and stones can break my bones, but
Yeah.
words can never hurt me.
Uh-huh.
Yet words do hurt us.
Oh, of course.
And we allow that to take place in
Mm-hmm.
many instances.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that comes from our own lack of self-esteem, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
it?
Yes, it does, because we can just say that person is misguided, And to ourselves, we can say that person is misguided. They really don't know. And usually they don't know. And usually they are misguided, or they wouldn't be saying the things they're saying. And so if we take that attitude, again, it dissipates. And again, everything is energy. And if we're dissipating part of that negativity, then we're putting light into the situation instead of greater darkness.
And that's an important concept that we talk a lot about, is that all of life is energy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Excuse me. And our thoughts create energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that energy manifests itself in our life. And so we need to look beyond these negative energies, or we need to look beyond the appearances of the event or the experience, so that we can allow ourselves to look beyond the appearance.
Yes. And when we interject positive words or actions, then we're sending light. And so everything clairvoyantly, everything can be seen as light if the situation merits light. And when people are joyous, you can see the light around them. And when people are dull and depressed and discouraged, you can see they look darkness around. There's darkness around them. There's that comic strip years ago where Fearless something Sam in Little Abner, Sam had all the black around him all the time, and I always remember that as being the epitome of darkness, because Sam was just encased in black all the time, and Little Abner was the hero, and he was always had light around him and his big muscles, but he was that's a good example of what happens on a very rudimentary level, that we create light when we're positive, and we create darkness when we're not.
And as we create light, then we are empowered to see beyond the appearance of the surface of this act or these words.
Yes.
And we can much more easily let them go, can't we?
Yes.
And beyond letting them go and not having them damage or hurt us as badly, although sometimes they're going to hurt, it's going to sting a little bit, but we're also sending light back to that person. And we're seeing and recognizing that their behavior is caused by something that we don't understand. And so we are actually sending them strength and power in the process.
And when we do that, we're doing a wonderful work, because people need to be uplifted. And we all know certain people who just make us feel better when we see them. And I know a policeman once said, if I'm ever depressed, I just go out and say hello to a certain lady in her office, and then I go on and my day goes much better. And if that person is sending light out into the atmosphere, then the person picks it up. And obviously that policeman was picking up light around that person. And isn't it good to know that we can do that work wherever we are, walking down the street, in an office, when we go about our daily chores, the people we meet, when we lift their spirits with light, and smiling is one way of demonstrating that light, and just the way the person thinks projects a certain energy and lifts other people. Isn't it good to know that we're doing a marvelous work when we do that?
We are, and that radiance goes out from us. And you said so well that people who are joyful really bring that joy to other people. And it's something that not only is a part of them, but it is an infectious, connective process that touches the people around them.
And you see children who are smiling and happy, and everyone around them is smiling and happy if they are. And then when children are not happy, then it affects us, and we feel the pain that they're feeling. So that's an example of how our lives touch on the lives of everyone who sees us, and it behooves us to try and lift.
And that's really important, that we're all connected, aren't we?
Yes.
Even the least or the lowest among us, and the most damaging. And the person who says something to us that hurts or cuts, and we are really one. And we need to accept that and understand that.
And we need to also just, in our hearts, forgive them, even if it doesn't seem appropriate to say it verbally, because it might seem condescending or other things like that. But if we just, in our hearts, forgive the person and say, whatever's making that person sad, I hope it'll be alleviated. And we could say it each in our own way, in a different way every time, but it carries power.
Magnificent power of forgiveness that's a reality in our minds and in our lives. And we'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the concepts and ideas that we're sharing today.
We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the new thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a free copy of one of these booklets. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807. Whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can reach it through Confident Living.
There's a fundamental teaching of New Thought that says, I behold the Christ in you. And if we're not people of Christian faith, which we are, of course, but many aren't, and we can change that to, I behold the divine in you, and the divine in me salutes the divine in you. That really sets about a common bond between all of us, that we can, a statement that we can make without reservation about everyone, even the seeming worst among us.
Yes, and when we greet everyone in a loving, thoughtful way, and if we greet people with those words in our heart and in our thoughts, but we don't say them verbally, it still has the same effect.
It does, because once we create it in mind, it goes forth.
Yes.
And that's fundamental to the teaching, that the dynamic of mind is a creative force, and the dynamic of our mind, when it manifests the mind of God or the mind of the divine or the mind of Christ, then we bring about a reconciling presence between ourselves and other people.
Yes, and a good example of that principle in a negative way is the TV shows that are so down, makes one's spirits go down, with all the negative things that are shown, and the way the news is hyped and shown in such a negative way instead of just forthwith. And so we need more and more people sending light. And you know, I think more and more people are sending light in just the way you described, and they might not even realize that that's exactly what they're doing, but they're doing it, and it's counteracting the negativity. Otherwise, I don't think we could bear all the negativity that's sent out into the atmosphere by way of the media, newspapers, magazines, and electronically.
Yeah, and our ability always to deal with that is to affirm the positive and to strengthen the situation. Now, many people are very affected by either newspapers or the or news or even movies and entertainment. But those who aren't, one of the things that Hattie Garlish, the founders of our organization, said that she began teaching this in 1927 and did until she died in 1979. That was that the newspaper and the news is the most tremendous opportunity for us to use affirmative prayer. And that affirmative prayer is really to identify all of these horrible things and horrible people and circumstances that would normally bring us negative feelings. And instead of accepting the negativity of that person or what they do or what's going on or what the news is telling us about it, instead choose to enfold that person or that circumstance and condition in the presence and power of God, to send forth that light that we talked about a few moments ago. And that creative power allows us to look beyond the appearance, because the appearance says that the newspaper or the news is just terrible, it's just awful. And of course, we see some horrible things happening in the news. And of course, those horrible things have happened always. It's not that these times are any worse than any other time. And I think we need to be clear about that.
Exactly.
These are very good times. And comparatively in world history, we thank heavens that we're here rather than living 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or at any point in world history. It's always been difficult. There have always been atrocities and terrible things happening. But in the midst of those things, we can see beyond the terrible things that are happening, and we can visualize and send forth positive, affirmative thoughts or prayers, if we will. And we can do that with when we deal with limit or lack. If we have limited resources, we can visualize prosperity and abundance. If we have illness or disease, we can visualize health and wholeness. If we have violence, we can visualize peace. If we have chaos and turmoil and confusion, we can visualize divine order. And so we can see that these positive attributes are there, but they're masked by what we see. And we were talking a few moments ago about the fact that everyone comes into this life as a perfect child of God, and then we get damaged in different ways. And some people are just horrifically damaged, and they do horrible things to other people. And yet, what we need to do is not to excuse that person, but to see that that person began just like we began, and at their core, there is that divine good. In the worst of people, there is that divine good. And if we can simply visualize that, and in our own mind and in our own heart and life, send that to that small point within that person or within that event where there is that divine presence, then it will begin to grow and a change will take place. And that's how the manifestation of change takes place. And that's the promise of looking beyond appearances. It's not denying that there are bad things, not denying that there is evil and sickness and limit and lack, but seeing the good and the positive that's always there present, but it's just out of our sight. But it's within our reach. And I think that building technique within our minds and within our spiritual being brings about a wonderful view for us to be able to look beyond the appearances.
Yes, that is very well said. And the life is a steady progression upward. And we know it's a steady progression upward because who would like to have lived in the Dark Ages, which you were alluding to a moment ago? Yes. Who would like to have lived farther back in time when things were life was so difficult? But I can remember when newspapers showed a lot of good things as well as the bad, and now it seems that all they show are the negative things. So we have to, it does give us a lot to pray for, but also we can know that if we know they're doing that, then it doesn't hit us as hard because we know that they're doing that. And like the TV news is hyped, and we know they're hyping that, then we know that they are, and it doesn't hit us as hard. I can remember 2 different times when my husband and I were involved in, once we saw a newscaster gathering all the people with big dogs together in one spot on Sunset Strip. And then when we got home, we saw that on TV, and I said, oh, if we'd just had a big dog, we would have been on TV. And then it hit us. We realized that this is what they were doing. They were hyping the news to make it look like everyone on Sunset Boulevard had a big dog. And I've seen I've had another experience like that too. So if we know that, then we don't let it hit us as hard. But if we're living in the light, living to the highest of our ability, then we do what Hattie Garley said. We pray for those people and pray for those circumstances and conditions. And then we don't get so bogged down. Right. And if we find we're getting bogged down, then we cannot see as much visually through papers and media, all the various media, and just step back a bit.
Yeah, and many people need to do that. But then we need to be able to come back and we need to be able to look objectively and in a non-judgmental way at everything in life. Excuse me, and even the most negative things in life. And I think that's the challenge of seeing beyond appearance is to look at the negative experience, to look at the negative actions of others, and to see beyond it and to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's not reality. That's the reality for the present moment in that life experience. But we can go beyond it, we can go behind it, and we can see the truth. And the truth is always beautiful, and the truth is always radiant, and people are always good. And at their very core, I think we need to understand that, and we need to embrace the concept and the reality that everyone, by their very nature, is good, because we're all created in the likeness and image of God, and there's no change to that. Now, our behavior changes in this physical life experience, but, and again, that's not to say that we need to excuse it or overlook it, but as we deal with that reality, we need to see beyond what these people are saying and what they're doing, and claim the reality of who and what they truly are. And we know in our minds and in our hearts that they are going to manifest themselves in the full radiance of their being, and they're going to overcome and be healed from the damage that has caused them to be where they are, that's brought them to the experience that they're in.
Yes, and we have to, and we realize, I've heard you say, what is. When you're dead, you're dead. When you're sick, you're sick. What is. So if we add negative energy to that by saying, oh, isn't that terrible, yes, then we're adding to what we're deploring. And I read something recently that I resonated to very strongly, and that is, don't send pity to people. Send love and compassion. Love is light, light is love. So send love to that person, not pity, because when we send pity to a person, it creates a darkness. And the darkness surrounds the person even more. And isn't that an interesting thought?
It's a wonderful thought. It's a
Yeah.
magnificent thought. And
Yeah.
it goes to the heart of the exact thing that we're talking about today.
Exactly.
And that is to send love in the midst of every circumstance.
Mhm.
And part of that means that we have to give up judgment.
Yes.
And of course, that's the hardest thing for us to do because we love to judge and we love to say, isn't it awful or ain't it awful? And that's one of the things we do best in many instances. But we need to get beyond that. And we need to be so big and so wonderful and so magnificent in our life and in our person and in our being that we can always see beyond the superficial negativity to the reality of the presence and the power of that which is good and whole and beautiful and dynamic. And that's always the case, and that's always the situation. That's really what we need to do with this world. We need to see, despite what the appearances are in this world, that the world is good.
Yes.
And we need to see that no matter what people do or say, they're really good. Now, they may not be behaving in such a fashion, but at their core they are, just like the world. The world is a beautiful, magnificent place. It has been changed by the actions of people, and by the minds and by the thoughts and by the behaviors and by the deeds of generations and generations of people. But we know, too, that people can change their behavior just like that when they change their way of thinking. And they change their way of thinking when others help them and surround them with the light that we're talking about.
Yes, and this world is better all the time, and we always go from one point to a higher point to a higher point to a higher point, and we can remember that we don't deplore the conditions under which we live, because we know that overall there has been improvement in life situations.
And this is a magnificent time. This is a magnificent time to live. It's a time of abundance. It's a time of prosperity. It's a time of health. It's a time of expansion of knowledge. It's a time of growth. And it's a time of cataclysmic change that's coming about as we move into a new and magnificent age. And so the great joy of the concepts and ideas that we're sharing with you invite us and call us to see beyond appearances and to claim the good in the midst of every circumstance and situation, including ourselves. And so we hope that you found this information useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
This program is a community outreach of Christ Church. Dr. Mike Costello speaks each Sunday morning at 11 a.m., and Dr. Iris Freelander speaks on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. at the church. On Sunday evenings at 6 p.m., there is a meditation and healing service. Come and join us. You will be warmly welcomed.